It's all coming together. It's all coming together for me. So many strands of research that I've done over the last however many years. The thing is, we the public are sold on the line about rockets and rocketry and the space race and nuclear weapons, and we had to stay ahead of them or they'd obliterate us. That's the line they give us most often in the public. But if you look at what they were really after, it was something else. The first director of the Office of Scientific Intelligence, Willard Mackley, traveled to Germany to set up a special program to interrogate Soviet spies. The CIA believed the Russians had developed mind control programs and wanted to know how U.S. spies would hold up against this capability if caught. He also aimed to explore the feasibility of creating a Manchurian candidate through behavior modification. Operation Bluebird was born. Bluebird later became MK Ultra. It was a research activity experimenting in behavioral engineering of humans.
Behavioral engineering of humans.
What have we looked at today? It seems like we got so far off track. But really we didn't. Because if you take a look from the standpoint of eugenics, and you know that the eugenicists were the elite of the society before World War II, before World War I. This author says, how did both the East and the West start with this cybernetic systems approach to governing, beginning in the 1950s? Was it carefully crafted by the supposed losers of the war? The eugenicists? The arrest of Ghislaine Maxwell is what brought all of this up, although these themes have been in many of my prior videos. I'll link to them in the description box. Robert Maxwell's daughter, Ghislaine, hooked up with Jeffrey Epstein, who funded science, weird science, crazy science, and hung around with a guy called John Brockman, whose job it was to publicize and make famous the scientists who wanted to manipulate our DNA, who wanted to merge man and machine. And in case anybody ever got out of line, there was this going on, the blackmail operation. If Ghislaine got herself a picture with some of these guys, or Epstein got himself a picture with some of these scientists, well, they could always use that, hang it over their heads, couldn't they? And of course, Ghislaine's dad, Robert Maxwell, was in the same game, science publishing. Intelligence. He was in occupied Germany at the same time as Reinhard Gehlen, whose unit was the one responsible for bringing any intel about Russia to the United States. So if they said, "Oh my gosh, you should see what they're doing. They're able to levitate," then the US felt like they had to keep up with this and do all kinds of experiments on people to try to make them equal to what the Russians were supposedly doing. What if it was all a lie all along? What if the main goal was to get people to compromise their ethics in an effort to eventually get them to become cyberneticians willing to control mortality, which means controlling death, and control fertility, which means controlling life, and control migration, which will help them balance their system. Her husband was married to the son of the inventor of birth control, fertility. Her husband is the son of Frank Molina, NASA astronaut, hooked up with all these people. The communist regimes, Jack Parsons, who was friends with Aleister Crowley and eventually L. Ron Hubbard as well. This guy went back and worked at the UNESCO, along with Julian Huxley, who's the brother of Aldous Huxley, who wrote the book Brave New World. And what's all this has come to is a surveillance state, is their cybernetic dream. That was the narrative, that there was this space race, that there was nuclear weapons, that it was all about pursuing technology. But where are the flying cars? Where are the colonies on the moon? Who even cares about rockets anymore? They don't shoot missiles. They use chemical and biological weapons. So it's always been about biology and the mind, I believe. And see, now They're setting up their new narrative. Out with the technological race for space and rockets, and in with the technological race for control of biology. What's given them the go-ahead to start this new narrative is the virus. And the virus came from China, of course. And the virus solutions are coming to us from the weird scientists. And it's all about eugenics in the end. The control of the human population. The self-directed evolution of man. It's all coming together. It's all coming together for me. So many strands of research that I've done over the last however many years all coalesce in this one story. The story is the arrest of Ghislaine Maxwell. You might have heard of this. Ghislaine Maxwell, pictured here, is the daughter of Robert Maxwell, but also she's accused of being the procurer of underage girls for Jeffrey Epstein in his blackmail operation. Now, there's way, way more to that story than I just said. But the thing about it is, there's a link between Robert Maxwell on the one side of Ghislaine and Jeffrey Epstein on the other side. And that link is science. The Jeffrey Epstein story is all over the news and it is tragic. And I don't want to take anything away from the victims of the sexual exploitation that these two allegedly put these women, young women and girls through. I don't want to take anything away from that. But the element of this that is shaping our current day predicament with the virus, with the tech takeover, with globalism, that element that is in common between Robert Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein is science and technology. The two leading men in Ghislaine Maxwell's life, both of these men significantly contributed to the technocratic world order that we live in now. Now I'm going to get to a lot of the things I'm showing you on this graphic soon, but first I want to go through some history and a reading that can kind of set the stage for you so that you have the context that I have. First, I want to read you a paragraph from a book called The Power of Systems. This book is about science and power. The idea for this volume began when I encountered a puzzling question. How is it possible that both Soviet and US governmental elites embraced the same scientific methods of governance, gathered under the umbrella names of cybernetics, systems analysis, and later policy sciences, and moreover closely cooperated in development of these methods during the Cold War? Surely, one would think, government of communist and capitalist societies would not be amenable to the same techniques of discipline and control. But this was the case when the science of governance, cybernetics and its sibling, the systems approach, circulated between East and West beginning in the 1950s. As is so often the case, an apparent paradox suggests a complex mechanism at work that we do not yet understand. I haven't read that book. I've just read a couple of paragraphs from it, to be honest with you. But that paragraph, those questions, have puzzled me as well. I've done a lot of research over the last 10-15 years, and I have noticed that the themes repeat over and over. This emphasis on a scientific, technological elite. And one of the big areas that they've always been interested in, sadly, is how to control the human mind. So in this video, I want to present evidence to you that I have maybe found an answer to this question. I think that they set up the bipolar world at the end of World War II. They pit Russia against the United States. They made sure to put a dividing wall between them. They called this the Iron Curtain. I know there wasn't a real Iron Curtain, okay? But these were two separate spheres that did not did not know what each other's cultures were like. We were kept very separate from one another, except for the intelligence agencies, which penetrated both countries, and the science, which penetrated both countries. This was how we, the rest of the world, the citizenry, were kept in a state of bewilderment. We always felt that there was a threat from the other side. This competition that was set up by the planners at the end of World War II, or probably before, this competition justified so much evil in the name of keeping up with the technology of the enemy. My first exhibit to you that I believe shows that this is what happened comes from declassified CIA documents. This is a collection of documents called Forging an Intelligence Partnership, the CIA and the Origins of the BND, 1945 to 1949. This tells the story of something called Project Rusty, where the American military over in Germany took in more than 600 former Nazi and some Soviet spies right from the German army and German intelligence services. And they paid for them, and they housed them, and they hid them, and they used them. This operation was called Project Rusty, and the leader of it was a guy called Reinhard Gehlen. The story is incredible, and I've gone over it before, and there's probably documentaries out there. There's certainly books out there that you can read that will tell you more about it. But what this essentially did was put Germans in charge of all intelligence coming out of Russia. They were specialists in going into Soviet territory, so they told the American army, and the American army believed them. And they also were very active in Russian, Soviet-occupied Germany after the war ended. So they were all over. They were the main conduit of information and intelligence about what Russia was up to after the Second World War. It's very important to remember that. And there's a really interesting document that comes from the very earliest days of adopting these spies into the American army. You see, the spies surrendered. They were taken as prisoners of war. And then they sat down with some colonels or different officers in the U.S. military, and they gave them a story. And they said that they quit the German army because they could see the future and they knew how it was going to go. So they wanted to throw their lot in with the U.S., with the capitalist side. They didn't want to be stuck on the Soviet side. That's the story they told. In fact, here's the document laying it all out. Deliberations, decisions, and measures leading to the surrender of the organization, this is the Gehlen Group, to the U.S. Army. Listen to what they said. While working together, the staff members came to similar conclusions concerning the true character and real intentions of National Socialism and of communism. Therefore, the different officers in question came to the same conclusions concerning the effect that the total defeat of Germany would have on the situation of Germany itself, of Europe, and of the world. Thus, towards the middle of 1944, General Gehlen, Lieutenant Colonel Baun, and Lieutenant Colonel Wessel became convinced that A, in the future, world politics would be determined exclusively by the U.S. and USSR. B, the U.S. will represent the democratic system based on the individual rights of man and will have the responsibility of protecting Western nations. The USSR will represent the principle of dictatorship, collectivism against individualism, atheism against religion, state economy against private enterprise. So you see right there, this group of defected, surrendered Nazi and German spies lay out how the world's going to go after the end of World War II. They say that's the reason they surrendered. That's not all they had to say. There's a little bit more. A shattered Germany will be between the West and the East in a state of agony. For the next decades, Germany will be in no position to become again an independent factor in European politics. In addition to that, the historical period of national states seems to be over in Europe, and it's to be replaced by a union of the European nations on an equal cultural and economic basis. This process of development, however, has not yet taken any visible form. Wow, how did these guys know that? Maybe because they were spies, so they saw the plans laid out? That can't be, because Germany hadn't planned on losing the war. So how did they know this? Who knows? But that's the sales pitch. And in case you didn't catch it, that's exactly what happened. That's the paradigm that we've been living under since the end of World War II. All right, next exhibit is to show you that right after they set up the CIA, which was the OSS, intelligence branches exploded. So spying became the occupation du jour. It was the Cold War. That's all they were going to do. They weren't going to fight with soldiers anymore. They were going to fight with information, right? And one of those very important points of information was going to be the technological race, or so they told us. And so in 1948, they set up the Office of Scientific Intelligence within the CIA to specially track scientific developments. And another thing they did, which you've probably heard of, is Operation Paperclip. Roughly 1,600 German scientists, along with their families, were brought to the United States to work on America's behalf during the Cold War. The program was run by the newly formed Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, whose goal was to harness German intellectual resources to help develop America's arsenal of rockets, and, they never like to talk about this one, other biological and chemical weapons to ensure such coveted information did not fall into the hands of the Soviet Union. Now, this included Nazis. Apparently, Harry Truman forbade the agency from recruiting Nazis, but they didn't listen to him, and they whitewashed the backgrounds of these scientists and brought them over anyway. They did this because they said, if we don't do it, the Russians will do it. By the way, the Russians also took a whole bunch of German scientists for the same reasons as the United States did. We kind of divvied them up. The thing is, we, the public, are sold on the line about rockets and rocketry and the space race and nuclear weapons, and we had to stay ahead of them or they'd obliterate us. That's the line they give us most often in the public. But if you look at what they were really after, it was something else. The first director of the Office of Scientific Intelligence, Willard Mackley, traveled to Germany to set up a special program to interrogate Soviet spies. The CIA believed the Russians had developed mind control programs and wanted to know how U.S. spies would hold up against this capability if caught. He also aimed to explore the feasibility of creating a Manchurian candidate through behavior modification. Operation Bluebird was born. Bluebird later became MK Ultra. It was a research activity experimenting in behavioral engineering of humans. The Nuremberg Code prohibits experimentation with humans without their consent, but they did it. They did it anyways. Why this is relevant, I think, today is because we have normalized this to such a degree that right now we are doing human experimentation in the full view of the world for these COVID vaccines. They're putting it on TV. They're saying human guinea pigs are being used. So where once we went out of our way to at least encode it into law that human experimentation is forbidden, now we celebrate it. How did we get here? The justification for taking in Nazi scientists who experimented on humans was that if we didn't do it, the other side would beat us at all these technologies, and then they would come over and conquer our lands and enslave our people and control the whole world in communism. Right? Where were we getting the idea that that was even happening? Well, from our spies, of course. And if you recall, many of the CIA's spies were German. These were the guys they put in charge of the Russian intelligence gathering. So it was a collection of 600 plus ex-German intelligence officers who were giving us the lowdown on what the Russians were doing. And they were saying crazy things like the Russians had developed mind control programs. They also were telling them that the Russians had developed remote viewing and telepathy and telekinesis and things like that. Have you seen the movie The Men Who Stare at Goats? If you haven't heard of it, it's all about this CIA experimentation with crazy things that they thought the Russians were capable of doing. And I argue it very possible that these German spies were the ones telling the United States that these were the capabilities of the Russians. So you see what I'm saying? They're playing one side off against the other. One of the things that the Army and the intelligence services wanted was access to all of those publications that the Germans were holding. So they went after the publisher of scientific journals. One of them was called Springer Verlag. And this is where Robert Maxwell comes in. Let's learn a little bit about him. In 1946, the 23-year-old Robert Maxwell was working in Berlin and had already had a significant reputation. Although he had grown up in a poor Czech village, he had fought for the British Army during the war as part of a contingent of European exiles. After the war, he served as an intelligence officer in Berlin, using his 9 languages to interrogate prisoners. At the same time, the British government was preparing an unlikely project, and this had to do with the science journals. Outspoken proponents of it were Charles Galton Darwin, who was a eugenicist. Yes, his grandfather was Charles Darwin. They wanted to get their hands on Springer Verlag. And apparently, Maxwell approached Springer Verlag in 1947. He told Springer he was attracted to the publishing business based on personal connections as a British press officer, and he made Springer Verlag an offer to speed up its export activities. He also wanted to take care of recovering for the company the valuable inventory that had been evacuated to Austria, and then he wanted to distribute all of it from London. Once that happened, MI6 or the British government or somebody moved in, and they wanted to pair Springer Verlag with another publishing company called Butterworth's. Now listen to what the history of Butterworth's is. Butterworth's directors were ex-British intelligence officers, and they hired Robert Maxwell to get this deal done. They hired Paul Rosbaud as scientific editor, a presumed Nazi who had been taken prisoner by the British, and he says he switched sides. And now all of a sudden, you've got Germans in charge of the intelligence coming out of Russia and a Austrian former Nazi, so they say, helping edit the science journals. All the ones coming out of Germany and Austria. The Guardian article states, science was about to enter a period of unprecedented growth, having gone from being a scattered amateur pursuit of wealthy gentlemen to a respected profession. In the post-war years, it would become a byword for progress. Science has been in the wings. It should be brought to the center of the stage, for in it lies much of our hope for the future, wrote the American engineer and Manhattan Project Administrator Vannevar Bush in a 1945 report to President Harry Truman. After the war, government emerged for the first time as the major patron of scientific endeavor, not just in the military, but through the newly created agencies such as the U.S. National Science Foundation and the rapidly expanding university system. Isn't that interesting? We all, anyone my age or younger, must believe that science was at the center of the universe forever. But that's not the way it was. It really didn't happen, especially this cybernetic, high-tech type science. It didn't happen until after the war. In 1951, Butterworth's, the spooked-up publishing house, decided to abandon the project of Springer Verlag, so Maxwell bought it for £13,000. Rosbaud stayed on as scientific director. He called his new company, by the way, Pergamon Press, which is a tribute to the goddess Athena. Athena has an owl, just like Minerva does. Remember Minerva from another video I did about another spying operation? called Operation Minerva with these cryptographic typewriter type things? See, as I said at the beginning, for me, it's all coming together. Here's a picture of the big owl outside of Springer. Look at it. Returning to this history of Springer Verlag, they say that as of January 1949, all journals ordered through whatever this agency is, would be mailed directly to the individual subscribers anywhere in the world without special customs formalities. That might seem like a small detail, but to me, it goes to this notion that they used to track this information. They used to see where and who was ordering scientific information, because it could be very important if someone was working on some kind of dangerous biological weapon or working on nuclear warheads. They would like to keep track of that. But all of a sudden in 1949, they canceled that. I wonder why. I wonder if it was so that nobody could find out who exactly had a deep and abiding interest in science and who might be working on these things. Here are just a few of the many published publications that came out of Pergamon: Aeronautical Sciences and Space Flight, Artificial Neural Systems, The Uses and Abuses of Skepticism. All three of these, to me, characterize sort of the era that we've been living in all our lives. Space race type thing, ballistic missile type thing, trying to connect humans to machines and trying to make machines think like humans. And then, of course, skepticism in my lifetime has become almost a byword for abusing anybody that doesn't go along with the mainline technocrat type science. What else have I got? In this Guardian article, it points out that before Maxwell became involved in scientific publishing, it was a very staid type of world, but he made it a party world. We would attend conferences specifically looking to recruit editors for new journals. There are tales of parties on the roof of Athens Hilton, of gifts of Concorde flights, of scientists being put on chartered boat tours of the Greek islands to plan their new journal. Well, who does that remind you of? Reminds me of Epstein and his island and his wooing of the whole scientific set. But who is really the captain of this enterprise? The same way Maxwell was, it's a guy called John Brockman. He's the one who put on these billionaire dinners. This is 2004, but he's had many of them. And some people who went to the 2004 billionaire dinners: Jeff Bezos, Eric Schmidt from Google, Larry Page, Sergey Brin from Google, Lori Park, Megan Smith, Pierre Omidyar, founder of eBay, Dean Kamen, inventor of Segway, Steve Case, former chairman of AOL Time Warner, and, of course, Jeffrey Epstein, who recently endowed the program for evolutionary dynamics at Harvard University, which is involved in what? Researching applications of mathematics and computer science to biology. A lot of this comes out of the World Economic Forum, which is something else that grows from the center of Europe. Klaus Schwab is the head and the creator of the World Economic Forum, and he is a huge transhumanist. He is a huge cyberneticist. Here's some headlines from the World Economic Forum, some titles of things they've put out. When humans become cyborgs. That's at Davos 2020. Meet the Swedish cyborgs that pay for their coffee with a wave of their hand. That's from 2017. Will the future be human? Says this guy in 2018. Hackable humans can become godlike. That's from 2020. When your doctor is a robot. That's also from 2020. That's where all of this has taken us. And it started way back here and here. The race for scientific supremacy. And unfortunately, it's really gone the way of cybernetics. Cybernetics is the control of systems. And we're about to get into how creepy that science really is. As a segue, I'll show you this. Interestingly, Springer Verlag had an office relocated to Wuhan, China in 1952. Even during the Cultural Revolution, the Medical College of Wuhan retained its devotion to German medicine. So we're all blaming China for this cybernetic surveillance state, totalitarian control grid. But where did it really come from? Did it come from Germany? Did it come from this same root after World War II? Just something to chew on. I came across this quite by accident, but boom. To me, this is a boom. It was published originally by Pergamon Press in 1988, Population Systems Control, and it's all by Chinese authors. Abstract. In this paper, the importance and urgency for population control in China is explained. The paper concludes with the study of population system control, which gives us the inspiration to develop a new discipline, systematology, to tackle the important issues which confront us in modern society. It was published, by the way, in a journal called Mathematical and Computer Modeling. Yeah, I guess they don't want to have a journal called Population Control, but maybe they're bold enough to have that now, I don't know. Let's look at some excerpts from this. This is from that paper. How to carry out the family planning program and control population growth are important and interesting issues for scientists to study. From the viewpoint of cybernetics, the whole population of the world is a system, which is named population system. Many factors determine population changes in a society: social institutions, environment, standard of living, level of education, wars, natural disasters, migration, and so on can all affect population development. But only fertility, mortality, and migration are the direct causes of population changes. It is through these three that all factors affecting socio-demographic change are manifested. See, that creeps me out, because what are the three main topics? Fertility? They're constantly funding abortion and women's health all over the world, especially the developing world. Mortality. Yes, they pretend they want to make everybody live longer, but if you look at somebody like Ezekiel Emanuel, he's going around saying that we should base everyone's value on life years. And in his estimation, babies and old people, they're not really worth very much. Because in babies, the state hasn't spent very much money yet in educating them and raising them and keeping them healthy and feeding them. So just let them go if they're sick, because there's no investment there. And on the other side of the scale, of course, old people don't contribute back enough to society, and they've already used up a whole bunch of resources, so get rid of them too. What they want, what Ezekiel Emanuel really wants, is for everyone to focus on teenagers, because that's where you get the most payoff. It's the most balanced energy in, energy out, investment in, output out, right? It's sick. And now, of course, in the last little while, migration, the third element, is what the globalists are focusing on hardcore. So that's from 1988, from a Chinese study about population control. Now here's some more from it. How can we change from the present 1 billion to 700 million and stabilize at that level? The only way to realize this transition is through control of the total fertility rate. And we know, of course, that China had a one-child policy. And some people want to bring that to the West as well. Down here in the paper, it says, similarly, attention must be paid to aging to prevent the population from becoming too old in the process of control. How would you do that? How would you stop an overall population from becoming too old, I wonder? Nursing home plague, maybe? I don't know. You see how it all relates. Interestingly, at the end of the paper, they talk about a professor, Qian Zhushen, who advocated a new discipline called systematology. I thought, I've heard that name before. I know that Chinese scientist, and you know why I know him is because he was one of the original members of the Rocket Boys. He, along with Jack Parsons and Frank Molina and others, started the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL. And then he went back to China because he was suspected of having communist sympathies. He helped them design their nuclear program, and he became a cybernetician as well. Isn't that fascinating? I mean, of course, in case you don't know, JPL, Jet Propulsion Labs, became NASA. Here's Qian Jushen here. Here's Jack Parsons. Here's Frank Molina, original Rocket Boys. Frank Molina is the father of Roger Molina. Roger Molina is married to Christine Maxwell. Christine Maxwell is Robert Maxwell's daughter, Ghislaine Maxwell's sister. This one, Isabel, another sister. She has interesting husbands too. One of them was the son of the father of birth control. Fertility, that's one of the main issues of the cybernetics people, the population control people, otherwise known as the eugenicists, right? So yeah, it just gets more and more interesting. In 1991, Robert Maxwell was killed. Some say he fell overboard on his boat. Other people say he was murdered by the Mossad. Other people say he was murdered by maybe MI6. I'm not going to get into that here. What's important to note is he died in November 1991. And John Brockman wrote this, The Emerging Third Culture, in 1991, where he almost looks like he stepped up to be a more public face of the science publishing world again, the weird science publishing world again. He was interested in cybernetics, transhumanism, merging man with machine, the singularity, quantum physics. He also has Marina Abramovich, who we've just talked about before, satanic artist in his milieu. He has ex-husbands of these people, and of course, Jeffrey Epstein, among hundreds of others. John Brockman is a very influential figure and needs to be called into account for his role in putting together this man with the scientists. I mean, here's some of the people: Bill Gates, Arianna Huffington, John Cusack, Jared Cohen, Dean Kamen. This is from 2010. This Michael Shermer was there. Michael Shermer is what? A professional skeptic. Here's, what's his name? Ray Kurzweil and transhumanism and immortality. Here he is with John Brockman. Here's the inventor of CRISPR, George Church, with John Brockman. There's Google guy. Forget who this guy is. Sorry, buddy. I'm sure you made some important contributions to the transhumanist world. Oh, look at that. Craig Venter is on the Human Genome Project. Here he is with Bill Clinton. Another interesting factoid is what happened to Maxwell's Pergamon Press scientific journal publishing empire. A company called Elsevier bought it out. I want to point out this logo, Elsevier's logo. Non solus means you're not alone. Tree, guy looking at it. But check out this similarity. This is the logo for the eugenicists when they were loud and proud back in the early 1900s. They didn't have any shame about trying to make racial hygiene a priority. And I just find it interesting that Elsevier's logo looks an awful lot like this. The definition they give here for eugenics is the self-direction of human evolution. The self-direction of human evolution. Consider the World Economic Forum wanting man to merge with machines. But I'm not done. There's still more, and this one, I just can't believe the influence of one or two people in this world. Qian Jushen, again, the guy from Jet Propulsion Labs, who went back to China and helped them develop their nuclear program, then became a cybernetician and tried to help them with population control. He comes up again all of a sudden, March 2018. He's dead, of course. But they say a revered rocket scientist set in motion China's mass surveillance of its citizens. His legacy is still unfolding in a second era that could have great consequences for China and the world. Qian, who died in 2009 at the age of 97, helped lay the groundwork for China's modern surveillance state. Early in his career, he embraced systems engineering, otherwise known as cybernetics, an interdisciplinary field focused on understanding the general properties common to all physical and societal systems and using that knowledge to exert control. By mapping a system's dynamics and constraints, including feedback loops, the systems theorist learned how to intervene in it and shape outcomes. Since the field's founding in the 1950s, systems approaches have been applied to areas as varied as biology and transportation infrastructure. That's how they look at you, everyone. Person, bus, doesn't matter. Rock, flowing stream, baby, rat, all the same. It's just a system. And here's another shocker from that article. The city of Wuhan is preparing to host in August the International Conference on Control Science and Systems Engineering, which focuses on topics such as autonomous transportation and the control analysis of social and human systems. Wuhan again. Systems theory doesn't just solve natural science problems, social science problems, and engineering and technology problems. It also solves governance problems. And they talk about China's social credit system is a vast effort aimed at using big data to track citizens' behavior. Xian Zhuchen again, cybernetics again. It's amazing to me how it all links together. Are you seeing the links? It's been this march since Second World War towards systems theory, cybernetics, this control of human behavior. It started with the experiments that were done by those Nazi doctors, and then we adopted them into our countries. Russia took some, the US took some, and then sitting in the middle were the people and entities that were to become the European Union, that were to become the World Economic Forum, that were to become the World Bank and things like that, or the Bank of International Settlements. All of these, the World Health Organization, that's all based in this one little area of Germany and Switzerland, the places that were supposedly on the losing end of the Second World War. But their science and tech and this division that they put in between us, the Iron Curtain, allowed them the catbird seat. It allowed them to play our side off against their side and keep us on this treadmill to going further and further and compromising ourselves more and more in our morals and values and how far we'll go with these sciences. I mean, imagine, we are so far gone that it doesn't occur to us that we should not be trying to engineer viruses so that they're more deadly. What are we doing? What are we doing? We should not be talking healthy people into becoming human guinea pigs for vaccines that will permanently change their DNA. None of this is about truth. All of this is about a false narrative and this competition between two siblings locked in a psychopathic rivalry. And then the whole system feeds on itself, feeds off of itself. As the lie gets bigger, the more people are invested in it, and the more important it becomes to them to keep it going. But it's falling apart. We're getting to the end. We can't go much further than we have gone. I don't think. We need people to wake up and realize this has been a ruse, a plan from the beginning. Because now we're here. China, Wuhan, again, Wuhan. It suddenly has an outbreak of a pandemic which allows it to unleash its surveillance technology. And now we're all being asked to do the same thing. Everyone has a contact tracing app and nobody's happy about it. Right, people don't want it. People from Singapore to San Francisco say they don't want to use them, citing technical problems and skepticism about privacy protections. Of course, we don't want it. And that has been the problem for the cyberneticians the whole time. We don't want to be treated like a machine. We don't want to be treated just like a mass transit system. We are people. We have souls. We are unpredictable. We want to have babies. We want to grow old. We want to make our own decisions. But these psychos want to control us just like we're a piece of farm equipment. One of the big guys in this whole world is Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum. Here's what he's saying right now. The pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world. The fourth industrial revolution will affect the very essence of our human experience. Yes, and I've shown that video a few times of the World Economic Forum's advertisement for the fourth industrial revolution, which starts off with the most creepy phrase anybody could ever utter.
The very idea of human being some sort of natural concept is really going to change.
And then she wraps up with this later.
One of the things that I think is so essential to free and open societies is freedom of thought. And up until now, the conversation we've been having is around freedom of speech. Once we can access people's thoughts and access people's emotion, we have to create a space that enables people to think freely, to think divergent thoughts, to think creative thoughts. And in a society where people fear having those thoughts, the likelihood of being able to enjoy progress is significantly diminished.
Once they're able to access the black box that's the brain, they'll be able to give us a place to think. They'll be able to give us permission about it. Maybe they'll be able to turn on and off fertility. Maybe they'll be able to put an expiry date on people. Who knows what they're up to. But if you trace this back, you can see that population control is high on their list. I'm going to wrap up here in an observation made in the Guardian article about scientific publishing. The scientific article has essentially become the only way science is systematically represented in the world. As Robert Kiley, head of digital services at the Library of the Wellcome Trust, the world's second biggest private funder of biomedical research, puts it, we spend £1 billion a year and we get back articles. It is the primary resource of our most respected realm of expertise. Publishing is the expression of our work, a good idea, a conversation or correspondence, even from the most brilliant person in the world, doesn't count for anything unless you have it published, says Neil Young of the National Institute of Health. If you control access to the scientific literature, it is, to all intents and purposes, like controlling science. Exactly. What have we looked at today? It seems like we got so far off track. But really we didn't. Because if you take a look from the standpoint of eugenics, and you know that the eugenicists were the elite of the society before World War II, before World War I, this author says, how did both the East and the West start with this cybernetic systems approach to governing, beginning in the 1950s? Was it carefully crafted by the supposed losers of the war? The eugenicists? The arrest of Ghislaine Maxwell is what brought all of this up, although these themes have been in many of my prior videos. I'll link to them in the description box. Robert Maxwell's daughter, Ghislaine, hooked up with Jeffrey Epstein, who funded science, weird science, crazy science, and hung around with a guy called John Brockman, whose job it was to publicize and make famous the scientists who wanted to manipulate our DNA, who wanted to merge man and machine. And in case anybody ever got out of line, there was this going on, the blackmail operation. If Ghislaine got herself a picture with some of these guys, or Epstein got himself a picture with some of these scientists, well, they could always use that, hang it over their heads, couldn't they? And of course, Ghislaine's dad, Robert Maxwell, was in the same game, science publishing, intelligence. He was in occupied Germany at the same time as Reinhard Gehlen, whose unit was the one responsible for bringing any intel about Russia to the United States. So if they said, oh my gosh, you should see what they're doing, they're able to levitate, then the US felt like they had to keep up with this and do all kinds of experiments on people to try to make them equal to what the Russians were supposedly doing. What if it was all a lie all along? What if the main goal was to get people to compromise their ethics in an effort to eventually get them to become cyberneticians willing to control mortality, which means controlling death, and control fertility, which means controlling life, and control migration, which will help them balance their system. Her husband was married to the son of the inventor of birth control, fertility. Her husband is the son of Frank Molina, NASA astronaut, hooked up with all these people. The communist regimes, Jack Parsons, who was friends with Aleister Crowley and eventually L. Ron Hubbard as well. This guy went back and worked at the UNESCO, along with Julian Huxley, who's the brother of Aldous Huxley, who wrote the book Brave New World. And what's all this has come to is a surveillance state, is their cybernetic dream. That was the narrative, that there was this space race, that there was nuclear weapons, that it was all about pursuing technology. But where are the flying cars? Where are the colonies on the moon? Who even cares about rockets anymore? They don't shoot missiles. They use chemical and biological weapons. So it's always been about biology and the mind, I believe. And see, now they're setting up their new narrative. Out with the technological race for space and rockets, and in with the technological race for control of biology. What's given them the go-ahead to start this new narrative is the virus. And the virus came from China, of course. And the virus solutions are coming to us from the weird scientists. And it's all about eugenics in the end. The control of the human population. The self-directed evolution of man. I'm going to stop talking now. I hope you liked it. It was a bit of a long one, maybe a bit scattered because there's a lot of threads to pull together with some of these. But if you did enjoy it, please subscribe. If you haven't, leave me a thumbs up before you go. Make sure to do that. Leave me a comment. Love the comments. What can I tell you? If you would like to support my work, please visit my webpage, amazingpolly.net. On the contact page there, you'll find my P.O. Box address. If you're going to send me a check, please make the check out to Polly Media. If you want to send me a donation through PayPal, I have that address available in the description box for you as well. What else can I say? Thank you, everybody, for listening, for being here. Oh, if you're still here, I want to propose something to you. I would like to begin maybe bi-weekly segment of reading some letters. And the subject I would love to hear about is, how did you wake up? What was your moment when you said, I can't believe the news anymore? I think something is desperately wrong. What was your red pill moment? Write me those letters. I won't use your name unless you tell me I can use your name. I'll just use your first name. But I would love to read those because to me, hearing from regular people is one of the most nourishing elements of doing this YouTube channel. We aren't alone. We are not the minority, I don't think. People are still sensible. People see through this. So I want you all to meet each other. That would be great. All right, so send me those letters and take care of yourselves. Be good to each other. God bless you all. Until next time, peace out.